Dave Soderquist is here from High Top Sports to break down some Florida football for us. Of course, the Gators get it on with the Utes in a rematch of what happened and the Cam Rising interception, and more on Cam Rising in just a second, that ended that game and gave Florida the first win under Billy Napier. Again, we want to remind everyone that if you're watching on the Florida Gators channel here at the Voice of College Football, you will need to go over to our SEC channel. The links in the comment section below to track our Florida content going forward. All right, you mentioned Graham Mertz, Dave. You had some interesting things to say before we started to record in regards to your analysis and some of the numbers and analysis that's out there on Graham Mertz, who's no big surprise been named the starting quarterback, and what he might bring to the offense, and maybe some issues that he has had in the past that he may be able to free himself of, being in a different uniform in a different location with a different offense.
Billy Napier announced him as starting quarterback this week. So a guy that, didn't really have the best career, I guess, over there at Wisconsin, had a really good first start. I think he threw like 90% in his first game against Illinois. So the hype was already there. And then kind of the train derailed a little bit. He was sacked 47 times at Wisconsin, 238 times he was dropped back. When he dropped back on passes, he was pressured. That's like 1/3 of the snaps that he took over there, just in drop back situations. His touchdown to interception ratio, it wasn't that great. 38 touchdowns to 26 interceptions. At a 59.2 completion rating for his career. I mean, they do like these adjusted completion ratings on PFF, and it was 69.2, but they can do that for any quarterback. So I mean, any quarterback can look good when you adjust the completion rating of drops that were thrown on target. But what I really like when I studied Graham Mertz and I looked at some tape, and Richardson had struggled with this a lot last year. He struggled with his accuracy. The short pass plays, and Shane Matthews has always, and I listen to Shane Matthews a lot. I love his podcast. He was on the Buddy Martin show, ranting and raving about Graham Mertz and how good of an arm that he's got and how he can do the simple things right and quick. I mean, he has an average time to throw at 2.73 seconds, whereas Richardson was 3.16, I believe. So he makes decisions a lot quicker. From 0 to 9 yards, he has a 71.1% completion rating. He's thrown for 738 yards there, where Richardson only had 58.6 in those 0 to 9 yards range of a completion rating. Richardson really struggled on those simple slants, those little out routes, all that kind of stuff. You won't see that with Graham Mertz. Now, when it comes down to those 3rd and 3s, 3rd and 4s, Graham Mertz will be able to, throw a slant if somebody's open and maybe get some yards after the catch with some of these wide receivers Florida's got coming in here, and Ricky Pearsall, his senior year, trying to get that NFL money this year too. So I think from a simple play perspective, I think Graham Mertz is going to be a better quarterback than Anthony Richardson. Obviously, he doesn't have the intangibles or the athleticism that Anthony Richardson did have. He's not going to run a 4-4 down the sideline and score a touchdown 70 yards out, but at least you'll get some good passing production out of him if he can calm down on interceptions. Richardson, he had that issue at the beginning of the year last year too, throwing a lot of interceptions. But then as the year went on, he kind of calmed down on those. And I think Billy Napier and staff, they adjusted what Richardson could do as a passer to cut down on those interceptions. And I think now with Mertz in this system and how they evaluate quarterbacks, I think now as Graham Mertz gets behind a different offensive line that he may not get pressured behind that much. I mean, when he's kept clean in play action scenarios, he's 66.7%, and he's really good on play action, which this offense does a lot of play action, does a lot of run game, play action. I think he'll thrive a little bit more in this offense with new weapons, but also you got to think in the SEC, those defenses get a lot harder and a lot more difficult too. So you got to throw that into the fire with Graham Mertz as well. So I think really the question mark is Graham Mertz, will a new offensive line, will new weapons, will a new team help him thrive, in the SEC? Because this schedule is pretty hard. It's ranked in the top 5 of the hardest schedules in college football right now. So it's not like he's going to be introduced to, a no-name team week 1. He's playing Utah, then he's got to play Georgia, then he's got to play a Florida State team that looks to be, hopefully maybe undefeated this year if they can get past LSU and Clemson and some of the other harder teams. I mean, he's going to have to play LSU, a team that has a lot of experience returning and an experienced quarterback. It's just he's going to have a gauntlet to go through, and a revamped Tennessee team as well with Heupel over there. So it's going to get difficult for him, but at the same time, he's going to have more skilled weapons around him as well. So I think that's the big question mark with Graham Mertz. Can he thrive on those short scenario situations and those 10 to 20 yard throws? I mean, he was only 48.6% completion rating on those 10 to 20 yard throws, and he only threw for 571 over at Wisconsin. can he throw that at least 10 to 20 yards? Can he get those big 20-plus yard chunks? Can we see a deep pass from him? I think that is where I have a big question mark for Graham Mertz. And in the simple throws, I'm okay with him on, but I think really coming down the stretch, I think Graham Mertz I think he'll be better. But as I said, the defenses get hard in the SEC. So I think that's just where the big question mark is right now.
I tend to side with the comment about the defenses in the SEC, but I think it's a good argument. I think we could match up the defenses that Graham Mertz played in the Big Ten. I think a lot of people would say that they were better. I tend to side with you, but I think it's a good argument. I think it's a good argument. Talking Graham Mertz and then talking offensive line. So you already mentioned how important that's going to be. Of course, you mentioned to me before we started to record junior Micah Mazkua and his injury status. I guess if nothing else, these offensive linemen are going to know where the quarterback is behind them. He's not going to be, circling the field back and forth. So just set us up along the offensive line and how confident you are in those guys.
Yeah, Micah Mazuka, he was injured for most of the time. He got injured, I think, back in spring there. He's actually recovering from injury. Billy Napier said he does expect him to play week 1. Right now, he's out there in kind of like some non-contact jersey, kind of, I guess, warming back up to being a starter. But we should have him week 1. I like Kingsley Eagleton. I think it's Kingsley Iguacan. I don't want to say it wrong on this show. I like him and where he's at, being the junior there. And Austin Barber, a kid that's had a lot of time here. We can see what he could do. Richie Leonard there on the offensive line there too. Damian George transfer from Alabama. I mean, it's going to be hard to replace Osiris Torrance. I mean, this was one of the highest rated kids on PFF and never gave up a sack his whole career out of like a ton of thousands of snaps. So it's like you're replacing Osiris Torrance, but you're also bringing in Micah Mazuka, another highly graded PFF offensive lineman coming in there to take that spot. Obviously, the center is Kingsley Eagleton, but of course, Micah Mizzou will be working right beside him. So I think the offensive line, I think that's the biggest question mark, because you hear a lot of just big explosive plays happening from this defensive line, Cameron Jackson, in some of these scrimmages. And you're hoping that kind of is just the definition of having a really, really good deep defensive line and not maybe the offensive line maybe taking a step back this year. But that's the joys of playing yourself in a scrimmage. It's like when one part of the team doesn't do well, you're thinking, well, is it because we suck in this area, or is it because we're really good on the other side of football? So I think you have a little bit of question marks there. But like as far as the offensive line goes, I don't know if they necessarily take a step back with Micah Mazuka there. The biggest concern I'm worried about offensive line wise is health. I think you need to really stay healthy on the offensive, especially offensive side of the ball, offensive line. I'm not really worried too much about the skill positions defensively with Jason Marshall, Kamari Wilson, Jadarius Perkins. I mean, those guys, you got depth back there in the backfield. I think more of just the skilled positions on defense, I would say, is safety is where I'm really concerned at with, you just haven't had good safety play since Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. You got Micah Mazuka, or not Micah Mazuka, RJ Moten, transfer from Michigan. He's coming in there to take some of that spot with Miguel Mitchell. I mean, you hear a lot about Kamari Wilson there as well. And Jordan Castell's been showing out in some of these camps. So I think, the safety play is where I'm really, really looking at in the defensive backfield. But as far as offensive line and all that, I think just staying healthy right now is probably the best part for this offensive line right now. Because right now, I can't say that they don't have depth, because they have depth. It's just a lot of unproven depth there on the offensive line.
74 starts coming back along that offensive line. And turning to the defense, based on what I hear, Florida has the unfortunate distinction of losing the first starting player in a training camp going into the season here. Justice Boone, a lot expected of him off the edge, but he's down with an ACL. How do you think they make up for that loss?
Yeah, Justice Boone tore his ACL. Obviously, he's not going to be playing the whole year. Jack Pyburn is a guy that I've been looking out for. Obviously, he plays that Jack position there, but Kelby Collins is in that spot. A guy that won MVP in the Under Armour All-American game, a top 50 guy. Florida's highest rated recruit last cycle. I mean, does he take that spot? And do we see some disruption from Kelby Collins? You also got TJ Searcy, another guy that was in that, that recruiting class, and Cameron James. I mean, these are all freshmen, but these were all highly touted freshmen from that class. You're probably going to be playing a lot of young people in that spot now that Boone is gone. And even Billy Napier alluded to it in his press conferences. He says you're going to see a lot of young players this year. I mean, there's a lot of these young players have been making noise in some of these practices, and I don't mean to step over the defensive end spot. But I mean, you hear of Dejon Johnson, having 2 pick sixes in the first ever scrimmage that they had. So, I mean, he's been making plays in some of these scrimmages. So I think a lot of young people are going to have to step up on that side of the football. And I think we got the talent there. I mean, like I'm pretty comfortable with any of those guys that I mentioned, even though that they're freshmen starting in that spot. And if they move people around, I would assume Jack Pyburn might take that spot as well. But it's one of those wait and sees. I know that they have more camps and all that. And I think Billy Napier talks to the media next Saturday as well around noon or so. So we'll find out a little bit more of who's going to really step up in that spot.
Dave Soderquist is here, folks, talking up the Florida Gators for us. So we appreciate Dave stopping by to break down the Gators. And you can catch Dave, of course, at High Top Sports right here on YouTube, audio platforms as well.
Yeah, so we usually do whenever we do our podcast on Wednesday at 8:35, we'll post the audio in Apple Podcast and Spotify and such. So if you can't catch it or you're more of an audio person and just want to listen to it in your car, we do post those there on Apple Podcast and Spotify.
Folks, here's the deal. If you're watching the content right now on the Florida Gators channel here at the Voice of College Football, you'll want to move to our SEC channel. We have the link posted in the comments section, and subscribe there for Florida Gators and the SEC going forward. All right, Dave, it's a great matchup. I love this, since we know what happened in the Swamp last year. It's a Utah team that had won a Pac-12 championship, and they were able to defend that despite a loss to Florida. Obviously, that doesn't factor into the conference race, but I'm intrigued by there's constant conference bickering on my show, and that's kind of one of the things we do, and people take pride in conference. And when the SEC can say, shoot, we got this Florida team that went, 3-5 in the SEC, or 2-6, whatever it was. I guess it was 3-5. No, it was 2-6, right? In the SEC? No.
And we didn't even beat
3-5, lost to Florida State, lost to Oregon State. I'll get the numbers right there. Must have been 3-5. And, we're the 10th or 11th best team in the SEC. We knock off the Pac-12 champion. And then, this Utah group, they're certainly wanting to get back at Florida. And it all sets up for just a really good football game, regardless of all the narratives involved and the way it ended in Gainesville with the Cam Rising interception. But now we've got a quarterback issue with Utah, where Cam Rising is apparently 50-50. So the Gators don't know who to prepare for. And the backup quarterback, Brandon Rose, took quite a shot over the weekend during a scrimmage for Utah. Bryson Barnes is a guy that came in a couple Rose Bowls ago and threw a touchdown to tie up the Ohio State game, but other than that has done nothing. So big question mark on the quarterback situation for Utah heading into this Florida game.
Yeah, we were talking about this on our show, and I believe a few weeks ago I said, man, if they can drag Cameron Rising out there in some sort of capacity, they will. I expect Cameron Rising to play. Now, when I look back at it 2 weeks later, I see this injury and Brandon Rose taking starting reps, a lot of them in scrimmages and practices, and now he's injured. And Steve Barlow from Utes 24/7 says it sounds like a broken rib / lacerated liver. So regardless, that's one heck of a shot you don't want to take to your body, and you can't throw, obviously, if you have injured ribs or you're injured in that area whatsoever. So this leaves Cam Rising or a third-string starting redshirt junior, Bryson Barnes, quarterback. And Bryson Barnes, he appeared in 6 games, only had 59 passing attempts. He's thrown 67.7% out of those attempts, 5 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. He's also rushed 152 yards. He's averaged 8 yards an attempt, but only 11 attempts there. So really not a lot of college experience for him. But when he's been out there on the field, I mean, he's thrown pretty well, 66.7%. Do you turn to that third string quarterback now, or do you throw out there a Nate Johnson or a Mac Howard? I mean, I don't know Utah's quarterback situation that well, obviously, but Brandon Rose was taking those starting reps. Now you're left with Cam Rising and Bryson Barnes, and I think that's the big question mark. And of course, if I'm Utah, you see the videos of Cam Rising throwing footballs in their practices, of course, but you only see him from the jersey up. You don't see where his leg's at or if it's in a brace or anything like that. And actually, it's pretty smart for Utah because you don't want to give the other team, a clue of who could be playing in that game. Obviously, if Cam Rising isn't fully healed, I mean, he can't step into his throws. It's not like he can run away from elude pressure. And Austin Armstrong loves to create pressure. So do you throw Cam Rising out there? I would expect them not to and maybe try out Bryson Barnes. But that's the big question mark everybody's asking. Are they going to throw Cam Rising out there or not? But personally, I said 2 weeks ago, if he was dug 6 feet under, they would dig him up and have him go play quarterback since it's Florida. But now I'm kind of starting to think that they may just return and go to that third string quarterback.
Yeah, if Cam Rising can play reasonably well, and you don't want to put your quarterback in harm's way in a non-conference game, the first game of this season, we saw a situation last year where Miami's Tyler Van Dyke had no business taking the field against Florida State, and they lost like 45-0, 45-3, I believe was the final score. And he was so compromised. His right arm was basically hanging off his shoulder, and there was just no reason for him to be out there. So, and this is a non-conference game, but still it's against a big opponent, big brand. It's against the SEC. It's on a Thursday night when roughly half of college football nation is going to be watching that game because there's only 2 significant games. So there's a lot of attention on the game. And because of the loss last year, losing 2 straight, I just can't sit well, I would think, with Utah, that they're going to put him out there if they possibly can get some reasonable play out of him.
Yeah, I believe it too. I would think that if he's about 80% or so, they'll throw him out there. But if they're talking like 50-50, there's no chance he's going out there on the field. So I would assume the third string quarterback's going there. I think it's just the fact that it's like nobody really knows how healthy Cam Rising really is. And I don't think they're going to give that away either. So I think that's where you're kind of just juggling. Okay, but if they were giving a lot of starting reps to that second string quarterback, you would assume that Cam Rising wasn't going to play this game. But it's just, that's the big question mark. And I think obviously Billy Napier and staff, they're going to prepare for both quarterbacks just in case Cam Rising steps out there on the field. But if he steps out there on the field, I know it's not going to be him at 100% capacity.
2 things, folks. Number one, that if you're watching this content on the Florida Gators channel here at the Voice of College Football, you'll want to subscribe to the SEC channel because that Gators channel is going away. And then number 2, the folks at High Top Sports do a great job every time we have somebody different on here, including, of course, you can hear the knowledge from Dave. They do an exceptional job. So get on over to High Top Sports right here on YouTube. Dave, I don't know if you've had a chance to really do a deep dive on Utah, but this is a lunch pail group. It always is. Kyle Whittingham has done an exceptional job. They're not going to wow anyone with, sure, they produce plenty of NFL players, but they're not at the top of the charts. They're not going to wow anyone in the recruiting rankings. They are along the lines of Kansas State and Wisconsin when it comes to getting a lot more out of what they've recruited. They're big on offensive line, defensive line play being at the heart of what they do. They do lose Clark Phillips, who's one of the very best cornerbacks in all of college football. They lose their top 2 pass rushers. They bring in some nice players at wide receiver and Micah Pittman from Oregon and Emery Simmons coming in from Indiana. So where do you think Florida may match up well, and what do you think may be difficult in this matchup going to Salt Lake City?
I think our DBs match up pretty well against Utah's receivers. I mean, you got Jason Marshall, a guy that's one of the highest graded PFF cornerbacks in the nation over there. And then also you have just Jakeem Jackson, a kid that, like, obviously he's a freshman and he plays on the other side of that football, but man, that kid has speed. He climbed up really, really high in his recruiting ranking. He started at like 400 and wound up being in the top 50 at the end of the cycle. And you know, with Jason Marshall there and some of the other experienced guys, I kind of like Jadarius Perkins a little bit more than anything. Jaden Hill's been kind of fighting an illness there in practice too. He came back last year, had a pick 6 against Missouri in his first game back. So that was a really cool thing to see from Jaden Hill there. Jason Marshall, you got Jakeem Jackson, Sharif Denson back there too. I think I'm pretty comfortable with Jalen Kimber, Devin Moore, those type of guys back there in the backfield as well, with the supporting cast helping them there at safety and star and all that. Like you said, you get Georgia transfer Jalen Kimber. Devin Moore, he had a shoulder injury. He's starting to be in return to play protocol now, so he's back. He's got that elite speed. He had a shoulder injury last year that kept him out for a while. So I'm pretty comfortable with the cornerback play against the receivers. The safety position, as I said, that's the only real big question mark I have because it just struggled so much from 2020 all the way to 2022. And when you got R.J. Moten, Miguel Mitchell, and DeJon Johnson back there, I mean, with him making the plays in the practices, I think that safety position will improve a little bit, but it's just so unproven just because, you know, we haven't seen R.J. Moten play against the SEC. We haven't seen much of Miguel Mitchell. And it's going to be something new with Trey Dean coming out and going to the NFL there. And obviously, Trey Dean, he had his struggles at safety. So does that safety position get a little bit more production out of it with Austin Armstrong and, Corey Raymond taking over most of that defense in the backfield? As far as offensively, I'm more concerned with Utah's offense more than I am their defense. I mean, you have Brant Kuithe, obviously, who gave Florida fits last year. He had 105 yards in receptions for 9 receptions. He has a 90.7 PFF receiving grade. He had 149 receptions last year, 16 touchdowns, forced 36 missed tackles. He had the most receptions from a Utah tight end since 1996. So, I mean, that's a guy that gave us matchup nightmares last year. And I believe that's going to be a main target for them. And another guy that didn't play against Florida last year, I don't think a lot of people know about, running back Jaquindon Jackson. He transferred from Texas. He was a dual threat quarterback over there, transfers to Utah, converts to a running back. And as I said, he didn't play at Florida, but he rushed for 530 yards last year, averaged 6.7 yards per attempt, 230 pounds, 6'2", runs a 4.5. He has a 91.6 PFF rushing grade, which is ranked 11th nationally from all rushers at PFF. So I think those are two guys that I would look out for there on their offense. And, obviously the quarterback situation has a lot to do with that. You got to pass the ball. You got to get the ball to Brant Kuithe. You got to get the ball to some of these receivers you just mentioned. So I think the starting quarterback will be a big factor for Utah. But, I mean, Brant Kuithe's so talented. You could have any quarterback throw at that guy, and he's going to get a reception, and he's going to not even maybe even house one, but he's going to get at least 10, 20 yards. So I think Brant Kuithe's the guy you got to really look out for. With Dalton Kincaid obviously not being there anymore, he's going to be the main target. And he was the main target last year against Florida. So, and I think that those two guys right there on their offense, obviously with the quarterback too, is somebody I would really be worried about if I was a Florida fan.
Bryson Barnes, he's still on the roster, correct?
Yeah, he's still on the roster.
Nobody considers him for this backup quarterback position from what I read.
Mark, he might be the starter.
Okay. All right.
He might be the starter in Florida here. We
that beautiful pass in the Rose Bowl to give the Utah some hope there in a tie game late in the game. And I thought, Bryson Barnes, why do I keep hearing about Brandon Rose? So set up this quarterback situation for us.
Okay. So here we go. So Cam Rising, y'all, in the Rose Bowl last year, he tore his ACL. He's been rehabbing that. Kyle Whittingham says that he's 50-50 to go versus Florida. If he does play, he's not going to be 100%, though. He's going to be, 80%. Rising says that he's good to go. But there were some interviews this week with Rising that it kind of just felt like that might not be the case. So I'm not overly confident that Rising is actually going to play versus Florida. If I had to put a figure on it, I'd put about 49%, which is super concerning because of this next event that just happened. Check this out, everybody. Utah had a scrimmage yesterday. A scrimmage amongst its team. And Brandon Rose, the backup quarterback that was probably going to start versus Florida if Rising doesn't go, he took a big hit from a Ute defender, and he was hospitalized, and nobody knows exactly the extent of the injury, but they're saying that he's not going to be ready to play for months, possibly like a spleen injury, rib injury. So he's basically done for the season. Brandon Rose is basically done for the season. So you go down the pecking order, and all of a sudden you're looking at Bryson Barnes is probably sitting there at number 3 with a guy named Nate Johnson that's taken very few called snaps. He's a 4-star kid out of California, quick as lightning, explosive. But it's going to be, if Rising can't go, it's going to be Bryson Barnes or Nate Johnson starting versus Florida. And it's probably going to be Bryson Barnes this game 1, I'm thinking, too, if Rising can't go. And, I was thinking that the Utes were going to thump Florida by 10-plus points. If Bryson Barnes starts, it could be a tight game. I'm throwing that out there. Bryson Barnes knows the offense, but the guy was a no-star recruit. He had 0 stars, guys. He was a walk-on and a pig farmer, actually, in central Utah. And he came on, tried out for the team, eventually made the team, got a scholarship. But as far as talent-wise, he doesn't have much upside. And so the Utes have major quarterback issues right now that didn't seem as bleak a week ago, but now all of a sudden they do. Florida's going to be starting Graham Mertz, and there's been plenty of a lot of people bagging on that. But really, if it's Barnes versus Mertz, it could be closer than we thought in this football game.
Yeah, again, if Bryson Barnes has any more throws in his arsenal like he pulled off against Ohio State in the Rose Bowl with that one beautiful shot over, to the tight end, was that Kincaid or was that?
That's Kincaid. Yeah.
Yeah. But okay, wow, that's too bad because
how do you hit your own quarterback in a scrimmage and take him out for the season? That
yeah,
might
that
start
can't
versus
happen.
Florida. I don't get that. They even had those big helmets on, you know, with like the extra cushions and
Can't
stuff. Like,
happen.
what?
Ooh,
I don't get it.
whoever
Like, make it make sense.
whoever is responsible for that, boy, he was running laps at least.
So that's the quarterback situation at Utah. So hoping and praying Rising's good to go, and 80% Rising's better than anything right now.
Well, Philip, this is unfortunate here. Well, obviously for you, it's unfortunate, but it's unfortunate here for us because I don't know how much SEC talk makes it back to you, but ever since Florida was able to pull off that game and Cam Rising made the mistake in the end zone last year, true ardent SEC followers have been able to hold that high. As you know, we got this also ran Florida team that went 6-7. They beat the Pac-12 champs, so you know we can beat anyone, kind of thing. And so everyone's been looking forward to this rematch, and I would certainly like to see these teams at full strength.
Well, let's hope and cross our fingers that Rising's good to go, because if he plays, Utah should win this game by 7 or more points. But again, if Barnes is playing, given the talent level, Utah's probably still ekes it out, but it's going to be close. And like, I don't care what quarterback's playing for Florida. Just knowing like Bryson Barnes, you know, ability and talent level and everything. Great kid, amazing kid, but just winning big time football games, especially with a Florida team that's going to lose a lot of games this year. They're still SEC talented. They're still full of blue chip recruits, right? So it could be close. It could be close, and I hate that too. But I'm hoping that Rising is good.
Now, of course, the thought is always once there's a quarterback issue, okay, who are the running backs? Well, Tavian Thomas, of course, had an incredible year 2 years ago, still had a nice season last year. So 2 top rushers gone. Jaquindon Jackson is the leading rusher coming back. Anyone else factor into this?
So Micah Bernard is the second string running back, and he actually played for the Utes last year. And he actually went to the transfer portal, was considering transferring over to Colorado, came back to Utah. So really, the running back room is pretty similar to last year outside of Tavion Thomas. And Tavion wasn't even with the team in the second half of the season based on some mental health stuff. So really, it's the same quarterback or running back crew that we had late in the season. Jaquindon Jackson's an absolute star, guys. I'm telling you. Player to watch out for on the Utes roster is Jaquindon Jackson. He is a stud. He was a high 4-star kid out of Texas as a quarterback recruit. He's made the transition to a running back, and he is a beast. So this running back room for Utah is stacked with talent. It's deep. So Bernard's the second stringer. Then you got a guy in Jalen Glover. That's a third stringer. There's just so much depth, quality there. So it's going to be one of the strengths of the team.
Okay. Of course, Dalton Kincaid gone. Brant. Now, I forget the pronunciation on his name like every off season, and then I'm reminded, then I forget. Keithy. So there is an E at the end. Yeah, Keithy. Couple nice pickups from Oregon and Indiana in Micah Pittman and Emory Simmons to catch the football if somebody can get it to him there in week 1.
Yeah, so the tight end room lost Dalton Kincaid, who, if you're an NFL fan, he is ripping it up in Bills camp right now. I mean, he's going to be an absolute stud in the NFL. He's a star for the Utes. But he was actually second string to Brant Keithy last year going into the season, going to the Florida game. Brant Keithy is all preseason Pac-12, a stud. The second stringer is Thomas Yasmin. I think that he made the second team, all Pac-12. So really, the Utes have kind of reloaded at the tight end position. It will be one of the strengths of the whole team, despite losing Dalton Kincaid. But these guys that are playing in the current roster are seniors. So, I mean, you're going into 2024 in the Big 12 season. Tight end might be more of an issue. But tight end is going to be one of the strengths of the team as well. Wide receiver for the Utes has always been a question mark, though. It's that skill position, wide receiver and cornerback seem to be where Utah's always kind of lacked that top-end talent. This team has good talent, but probably not as good as, you know, some of the other positions on the offense. You've got Pittman, as you mentioned, and Simmons are transfers in. They're going to have playing time to start. You've got Vele, who's a starting receiver, and then Money Parks, they're coming back too. So you've got some depth there, some 4-star talents coming in at that wide receiver position. But if I had to put a question mark at any position group on the team, it's going to be the quality and production of the wide receiver group.
We can go through the rest of the team here. I know that 3 starters back on the offensive line, 84 starts. Defensive line is well solidified with 7 of 8 of the top tacklers coming back, and Van Fillinger and Junior Tafuna, who was a freshman Pac-12 Player of the Year a couple of years ago. And so is this going to be the typically stout Utah offensive and defensive fronts?
Yeah, so Andy Ludwig, the offensive coordinator for the Utes, loves this offensive line. And frankly, like backing up even more, Kyle Whittingham recently said this is the most talented Utah team he's ever had. Ever had. Kyle Whittingham doesn't say that kind of stuff unless he means it. So, I mean, there is a lot of quality and depth on both the offensive and defensive line. There are 2 preseason Pac-12 players on the offensive line. A lot of experience, a lot of starting experience, a lot of depth there. The defensive line is going to be stout too. So really no concerns on the offensive defensive line. Utah will hold their own. The defensive ends, so the edge rushers last year were kind of an issue for the Utes. There were a lot of injuries, not a lot of pass rush. The guys are healthy. They're back. And in camp, really one of the big storylines is the pass rush. And judging by this Brandon Rose injury, I mean, I'm not doubting that actually at all. Gee,
just hit the other guys like that.
Still don't get it. I'll never get that. But yeah, so the edge rushers, the quality is a little higher this year. So the defensive, offensive line are going to be sound. Edge rushers will be improved, and one of the strengths of the team as well. When you bump it out, though, look at the cornerback. We lost Clark Phillips. The Utes lost Clark Phillips, who was just a stud, one of the greatest cornerbacks in Utah history. But we replaced him with a transfer in, Miles Battle from Ole Miss, from Mississippi. 6'4" kid, played in the SEC for a couple of years. So there is some returning talent at cornerback, but still historically, again, the wide receiver and cornerback side of things is giving the Utes kind of problems. So I think that the cornerbacks are good. There's not a ton of depth there, and that might be a concern if there's a lot of injuries on the cornerback side. And then you bump it out, actually looking at linebacker, Utah is bringing a lot of talent in. They've got a transfer coming in, Giovanni Lamuni, I believe that you say his last name, and he was one of the highest tacklers for Stanford last year. He came in, transferred into Utah. There's a lot of return talent. Linebacker will be a strength. And then you're looking in the secondary, in the safety room, some returning talent. We had a transfer out. So it seems like there's some good talent in the safety room, but not a ton of depth either. So the areas to look out for on this Utah team, wide receiver quality, and then the depth at cornerback and in the safety room. Everything else is really pretty solidified outside of the quarterback injury situation.
Phillips at the Wild Ute on Twitter. If you want to follow all of his tweets, check out Philip on Twitter, and also it's the Holy Rivals right here on YouTube. Philip, we appreciate you stopping by.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you wanted to hit on before we move on?
Don't let your quarterbacks get hit in scrimmage. That's the big idea. Number 2, the takeaway, y'all, is Kyle Whittingham said this is the most talented Utah team he's ever had. So if the quarterback situation, if Rising starts week 1 and he stays healthy, this is a special team. I don't care what who the opponent is. Utah's going to be in these games. They're going to win a lot of games if Rising's on the field. And don't be surprised if they're better than you anticipate, better than that 14 ranking in the coaches poll. I think Brett McMurphy rated the Utes 22. I'm just shaking my head. I'm shocked, because this team is actually more talented than last year's team. And if Rising is good to go, then we'll see what happens. Maybe special.